If you can walk to get your coffee, but your barista has to live an hour away, you don't live in a walkable community, you live in a theme park. Yes. And like, I feel like a lot of people do live in theme parks. And I feel like, you know, I don't ever want my world building to feel like a theme park. Even if I'm writing about something that's happening at a theme park, I want there to be an awareness of the backstage areas, because a theme park has a backstage area.
Welcome to the Streets.mn podcast, the show where we highlight how transportation and land use can make our communities better places. Coming to you from beautiful Union Station in Toronto, Ontario, I am your host, Ian R. Buck. That's right, I'm recording this intro during my vacation, which very well might give us material for future episodes. Today you'll hear our producer Sherry Johnson interviewing beloved local author Naomi Kritzer about her approach to incorporating a sense of place into her novels. Let me hand you off to them.
I am so excited to be here with Naomi Kritzer. St. Paul residents might know her as a good neighbor, mom to 2 grown children, and a subject to change number of cats. Our listeners may know her best as their Twin Cities voting booth pocket pal for having guided so many of us with her thoughtful elections blog. We promise you an election season episode with Naomi about that in the fall. But in my nerd circles and around the world, Kritzer is known for her immersive, award-winning speculative fiction. She's won the Hugo Award, the Nebula Award, the Edgar Award, and the Minnesota Book Award. This year, she's a Hugo Award finalist for Best Novelette for The Four Sisters Overlooking the Sea. I read it Sunday and got flappy, happy hands. You should too. Naomi Kritzer, welcome to the Streets.mn podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
So, the reason I wanted to have you on this podcast to talk about writing is that I'm drawn to the ways you acknowledge the built environment in your work. We're talking land use, history, and planning, concepts of ownership, and even transit. Am I just seeing things when I read your stuff? What's your relationship to land use and transportation advocacy, Naomi?
So I was thinking about this question actually 2 weekends ago when I went back to Madison, Wisconsin, which is where I'm from, for bat mitzvah. The bat mitzvah was for the granddaughter, one of the granddaughters of Ken Golden, family friend and Madison alderman for quite a few years. My first political involvement ever was helping with Ken's campaign, the very first time he ran, which was in sometime in the late 1980s. I don't remember exactly when. But he was a really close family friend and still is. And my mother was the president of the neighborhood association for a while, and may have been. I know she worked on Ken's campaign. I don't remember exactly what she did. Ken is an urbanist. Not that we had that term, or at least not that I knew that term in the 1980s. But Ken is a really strong believer in the value of transit and the value of thoughtful land use and density and housing and not prioritizing parking. And these were all things, I mean, as a teen in the 1980s, I was, I sort of viewed parking as my birthright. And Ken was the first person I ever talked to who spelled out for me in really specific ways how much it costs to provide a parking space. And that he was like, let's take a flat parking lot. That's kind of the cheapest you can do. Obviously, a parking garage is way more expensive. And this is how much it would cost to level it, pave it, paint the lines, maintain the asphalt every year, clear the snow every year. And this is how much it costs per space.
Yeah.
This thing that you think of as cost-free is like a whole lot of money for every single space, every single year. And this, this was my sort of my first introduction to this idea.
And back then, like, a car was like a symbol of freedom,
Right,
adulthood.
right. That's where my understanding of land use and transit really started. Was growing up in Madison, which was a town that has some issues with urban planning. If you've ever been to Madison, like that line from Jesse Ventura about how drunk Irishmen, I don't know who designed the road system in downtown St. Paul. I don't know who designed Madison, and I don't know what they were on.
Well, it's the
but
isthmus.
I think it's
the isthmus, right?
I mean, why did they put the Capitol in the middle of this tiny strip of land between two enormous lakes? It's a fascinating choice. It's really aesthetically pleasing and the most impractical design you can possibly imagine. Anyway, I
So you're pretty founded in this stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean,
So I got the first idea of talking with you about, for this podcast, when I read the extensive Minneapolis-St. Paul material in your young adult novel, Chaos on Catnet. Can you talk about some of the locations you chose for that book and maybe why?
I really love writing about Minneapolis and St. Paul for a number of reasons. First, I really love these cities. These are great cities. And they've got, like, each city really has its own magic, but our magic is a little hidden here. Like, you're more likely to find it if, like, somebody local takes you to see stuff or tells you where to look. But also just because it's a lot easier to write a sense of place well when I'm writing places that I know. So some of the locations in the book, first of all, Powderhorn neighborhood. Stuff's mother gets an apartment in Powderhorn because I have a lot of friends in Powderhorn, and I really like the neighborhood. And Nell's father's polycule also lives in Powderhorn because if you've got a polycule and one of them is an artist who works in paper mache, of course they live in Powderhorn. Of course they live. Where else would these people live? And I made up a global dumpling shop that doesn't exist but totally could. I wrote about Summit Avenue, and there's a bit that takes place in a decrepit mansion that's being renovated. I got to go see a really decrepit mansion that was on the market at one point.
Yeah.
And it was, like, fascinating and really creepy. Like, people don't realize just how much money it takes to maintain.
Yeah.
Like a late Victorian mansion that was...
Honestly, doing advocacy in that neighborhood, I think that half the ire we get from Summit Avenue folks is just that you have no idea what I've put into this house.
It's right. They're like, I think they feel like they don't get the credit they deserve for the, like, really expensive historical preservation project that every single one of them is involved in.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, there's I have some sympathy, right? It's really expensive to keep up an old house, and those houses are huge. Anyway, so I wrote the house in the book is being renovated by a family that's living there and renovating it. Can Wonderland is in the book, at least a version of it. Can Wonderland is real and really cool. It doesn't have a roller coaster. I added the roller coaster, and as far as I know, there is no evil genius using it as his headquarters.
So my teenager loved these books, and she commented on how Can Wonderland in the book is kind of like a Five Nights at Freddy's feeling. Are you familiar with this? It's big with the kids. I'm just saying you struck a chord.
Oh, and I'll also note that the place where the cult has its hideout is based on a real location, which is a really awful summer camp that I went to as a child. I changed the name of the town nearby, but it is based, I pulled it up on maps and looked and figured out how long it would take to drive there. And yeah, the original book is set in, it's set in a town that I gave a fake name to, but somebody who's from the real town that the town is based on recognized it. So I ran into somebody who was like, this is my town, isn't it? And I was like, yes. And she's like, I could tell because of the distance from Marshfield. I was like, oh yeah. Yeah.
I guess, again, you know how to explain place. Yeah. You can't hide. All right. So we're going to have you do 3 readings. The first is from this book, Chaos on Catnet. It's second in the series, featuring a savvy queer teenager whose mother moves her around a lot in an effort to evade her abusive father. She gets involved in an online community populated by AIs with dubious ethics. In this scene, she has an assignment to ride the Lake Street bus from school to the Midtown Exchange. The year is 2030.
Yep. So this is from the viewpoint of Nell, who is the friend of Steph, but not the one whose mother was moving her around.
Thank you.
This afternoon, my peculiar high school says my assignment is to ride the city bus. Specifically, I need to choose a destination, ride the bus there, and bring back some souvenir to prove I went. Steph has the same assignment, which makes this slightly less terrifying. My mother used to warn me about how dangerous public schools were. When she was in high school, kids got beat up all the time. A girl got punched in the face on the first day of her ninth grade science class. There were kids smoking grass in the bathrooms and maybe also shooting up heroin. And that was just in her school. City schools, well, those lockdown drills you heard about weren't just for show. I should note that this character was homeschooled by a woman who was in a cult. So her viewpoint is, Mom would poop out an entire litter of hairless baby hamsters if she knew that my father had enrolled me at a school that was making me ride a city bus. But this is good, actually, because I get to pick a destination, and I have a quest from the catacombs. I've heard other people talk about quests, but I never got one before. Quests are optional. The missions aren't supposed to be. When you do a quest, you can go up a whole lot of levels a lot faster. Sometimes you're even granted the opportunity to ask the elder a question. And my quest starts with getting myself to something called the Midtown Exchange. I click accept, my heart beating a little faster as the cheerful teacher spreads out a paper map of the city so we can pick a destination. Where's the Midtown Exchange? I ask, trying to keep my voice casual. The teacher points it out on the map. Is that where you want to go? I nod. She looks at Steph. Is that okay with you? We'd like you to stick together. Steph shrugs. Sure. We each install an app on our phone that does bus routes, and we're handed our bus passes and a lanyard to carry them in, and then sent out to the bus stop in front of our school. Have you ever ridden a bus before? Steph asks. No, I say. Have you? No, she says and laughs nervously. She puts her bus pass in her pocket, not in the lanyard, and after a minute I do the same. Steph acts much more worldly than I feel. She's lived in nearly 100 small towns instead of just one, so it's easy to forget that she's never lived in a big city before, and being reminded of this makes my palms sweat because I was thinking I'd just let her tell me how to do this. There's an elderly black man with a walker at the same stop as us. The bus trundles up, opens its doors, and starts lowering itself to the curb with a loud hiss. Steph tries to lean in to ask the driver, is this the right bus to get to the Midtown Exchange? But she's drowned out. You've got the right bus, the elderly man says. When the bus is fully lowered, it flips out a ramp with a loud beep, and he boards and then glances back at us. You're allowed to use the ramp. Come on in, he adds. I'm a little nervous taking the word of a fellow passenger over the driver, but Steph gets on, so I follow her. There are many empty seats. We swipe our passes and make our way to a spot near the middle, where there's another door. I like the seat because it seems like it would be easy to escape out that door if we had to. The app is supposed to tell us where to get off, but I don't trust it. And I'm going to skip some stuff. Are we almost there? Nell asks. Steph scrutinizes her phone and then leaps to her feet. I think we get out here? Maybe? I glance at the old man who told us we should get on. If you're going to Midtown, you'll want to sit back down, he calls. This is Floyd Plaza, and you want Floyd Avenue. Steph stares at her phone for a second, utterly perplexed, and then says, oh, yeah, that's really confusing. She sits back down and calls, thank you, towards the front of the bus. If you young ladies would like to come sit by me, he says, I'm actually going to that same stop, so you can just get off when I get off. We move up to the front of the bus. Are you new to Minneapolis? He asks. We nod in unison. I've lived in this city for 40 years. 43, actually. So relax, because I won't let you miss your stop. He gives us running commentary on Lake Street as we head west. Floyd Plaza is only about 10 years old, and he points out a series of newer buildings that were put up after the riots, which he says like you'd say after the war. You'll know you're almost there when you see the rocket ship, he says, and I think he's joking, but there's a 2-story building made of sandy bricks with an aluminum rocket ship sculpture on the front that reaches all the way to the roof. And a minute later, the bus stops for us to get off.
Thank you. And that rocket ship building is?
Uncle Hugo's science fiction books, as it exists in this novel.
What I imagine that was one of the fun things, imagining at that time that you wrote it, what Minneapolis St. Paul is going to be like in 2030. What else was fun about that thought experiment?
Probably the most fun I had was Can Wonderland, because, I wanted to use the real building as a base, but also I added an artist designed roller coaster, and I filled it with robots because there's a lot of robots in this future. And that was a lot of fun.
Nice. So what was challenging? I'm imagining that this scene you just read was particularly challenging.
Yeah. Figuring out what to do when I was revising this was a really interesting challenge, because I was revising this April, May, and June of 2020.
And then you got some advice from a friend.
Yeah. So I was revising this I wrote this in 2019. And then I got my editorial letter in February of 2020, and I set it aside for a while. And normally I set it aside for I read a letter, set it aside, and come back in about a week or two. But I got wildly distracted by the fact that we were having a pandemic. And finally in late April, I started seriously working on revisions. And this book had a bus ride down Lake Street, and it has a trip later in the book to Uncle Hugo's science fiction bookstore. And so at the end of May of 2020, this book has fictional riots, and I could not work on that. I realized as real civil disorder was happening around me. I just couldn't. And I sent my editor an email and I said, hey, I'm going to miss my deadline. And then I tried to figure out how to do this and what to do with this, because this is a near future setting. It's supposed to be about 10 years out, although, we're halfway to 10 years from 2020, and it's, we don't have nearly enough robots to make this make this story work. But, it's supposed to basically be almost our society with some stuff that's a little unfamiliar. Yeah. So I emailed my best friend, Lyda Morehouse, who's also a writer. And I was like, how do I do this? How do I know what it's going to look like? What do I even do? And she said, write the Minneapolis that you want to see. And that was really good advice. And she said, you want Uncle Hugo's to rebuild, don't you? So put it back, give them an even better building, make it spectacular, make it the building you wish they'd had all along. And so that's what I did. And so in this book, Uncle Hugo's is on Lake Street, very close to where its old location was, which is not in fact where they reopened. I really like their new location, but I put them in the wrong spot, but such is life. There's a park where the 3rd Precinct was. And there's a street that's been renamed after George Floyd.
And the park, is that Floyd Plaza?
The Floyd Plaza is a park in the location where the 3rd Precinct was. And it is writing the Minneapolis that I wanted to see was very much the right answer. And
seems like urban planners maybe could learn a few things from writers, and especially speculative fiction writers sometimes, right?
Maybe. Sometimes I'll say that I am freed from considerations trying to get my ideas through a planning commission. So writing mentors often talk about the need to read like a writer, not only for enjoyment, but also for inspiration, hints on technique. What writers have been most inspiring to you in terms of writing about place? So I have a couple of answers. First of all, Fonda Lee, who wrote the Greenbone series, which starts with Jade City, which is set mostly in around a city called Kekon that is, maybe a fictional Singapore. It's a little island. It's a tiny little island that's mostly the city. It was colonized by various groups, but they have this magical substance called jade, bioactive jade, that a very limited number of people can use safely without chemical enhancement. Mm-hmm. There's American analogs who've come up with a chemical enhancement so that their soldiers can use it. It's a really good series, and it is like the sense of place in those books is intense, and the world building is immersive in a way that's just amazing. It's so good. They're really, really good books. I really like Lois Bujold's sense of place. She did one thing that always drives me a little nuts with her fantasy world, which is that she decided that it's set in a southern hemisphere and not a northern hemisphere, but it's otherwise our world is just turned upside down. So whenever they're talking about north, I have to remember they mean south. She's just not I think what she wants the reader to be doing, but since she uses a lot of real world geography, I kind of can't not. So, but it's really just, well described cultures and scenery. And there's in her later series, she has a character, Penrick, who starts out in what's a place analogous to Switzerland and winds up in a place analogous to Albania with stops in Venice and various other places in between. He does a lot of traveling. Yeah, Lois is an amazing, she's local. She's an amazing writer in a whole lot of ways, but very good for sense of place. Years ago, I will note, I read Emma Bull's War for the Oaks, which is kind of a classic Minneapolis novel. It's worth noting for people who haven't picked it up before that a lot of things that later became kind of cliches of urban fantasy originated with War for the Oaks. She was inventing these tropes. They were new when she did them. And then recently, The Pairing by Casey McQuiston it's a romance novel. It's a second chance romance novel about two people who were on their way for this amazing food and wine tour of Europe when they broke up. And then they weren't able to get a refund. So they instead got a gift, a credit, right, towards, do this trip again at some later point. And they both waited until it was about to expire and they had to go. And so they end up on the same trip.
Oh my gosh.
And what I will say, I love a lot about this, the food descriptions and the place descriptions are really lavish. It's very, very clear that Casey McQuiston took the money they made from the Netflix version of Red, White, and Royal Blue and spent a big chunk of it on an incredibly lavish food and wine tour.
Oh my
and
goodness.
Wrote every cent of it off on their taxes.
That's amazing.
Total validity and legitimacy. And I'm just live the dream, Casey. I am so happy for you.
Hacks.
But also really, really amazing food writing and and a very nice, a nice romance. Also in the romance genre, Emily Henry's Book Lovers, which is partly a deconstruction of the tropes of the small town romance. But the two characters end up in a small town where she has been brought by her sister for vacation, and he is there because it's actually his hometown. They met in New York initially. And what I love about this is that the small town is so much weirder than small towns in romance novels ever are.
All right. So I think we're going to move to the next reading. This one is The Four Sisters Overlooking the Sea. How did you come up with the idea to write about this seaside town in Massachusetts?
So I wanted to the idea originated with the thanks for typing hashtag in 2017. Bruce Holsinger, who's a fiction writer, back in 2017 started tweeting out little photos of acknowledgments in books written by men in the 30s and 40s and 50s, where they thank their wives for typing. And it's so clear in so many of them that their wives were doing so much more than just typing. And I mean, even just typing, it was significant labor. But these women also... in one case, they were transcribing his handwritten historical records, which is really complicated job. Some of them were like doing data analysis or, a lot of these people were uncredited co-authors and they don't even get named. They're just thanks to my wife. And I like that was something I read at the time and I was fascinated and horrified by it. And then I was thinking about selkies. And something I like about science fiction and fantasy is both that you can make things literal that are sometimes metaphorical, but you can also make things metaphorical that are literal, that were like originally literal. And like the idea of the selkie story is that the man steals the woman's true self. Like that's really what the story is about.
So they're sea creatures that look like seals.
Yeah, selkies are seals that can shift into women. And the stories about selkies frequently have a man who sees them and steals their seal skin so they cannot turn back. And like, I just thought that, I just felt like that this was a story that these two things could be related in an interesting way. And so that's, and then it was set in Massachusetts because it needed to be a coast, right? The Selkie stories come from the North Atlantic. And I've spent a lot of time in Massachusetts because that is where my husband is from. So we spent a lot of time, obviously, Finstow is made up, but hopefully the New England stuff rang true because it is at least partly based on places that I've been.
Nice. Well, so this reading is from The Four Sisters Overlooking the Sea. It is a novelette from the September-October edition of Asimov Science Fiction. You can get it online for free. Again, you need to read it. So it focuses on the wife in a dual PhD family whose academic career was scuttled when her data was accidentally scrubbed. And the story finds her tasked not only with editing her tenure-track husband's publications, but also with finding housing for his sabbatical at Harvard. She decides on a rental in the mysterious town of Finstow, Massachusetts. So the reading begins with her taking her daughter to a nearby beach.
I adjusted the driver's seat, and Cordy moved Stuart's mess of papers to the back so she could sit up front, and we set out. There didn't seem to be a road that went up to the overlook, but I found a sign saying The Four Sisters, and there was a space by it to pull off and park the car. Beyond the sign, we found a gravel path leading uphill through a scrubby wood, and a few minutes of walking brought us out to a spot with a spectacular view of the ocean. Also, 4 standing stones. These are not common in Massachusetts, but there are groups of stones like this all over Europe. Technically, a standing stone is called a menhir, a Britannic word that means long stone. In the U.S., they don't usually look ancient. These did, or at least they looked like they might have been there since the 1700s. They were weathered by the wind and thick moss grew on the shaded parts. The stones stood in a curved line. 4 women staring out at the gray waves of the Atlantic? I could see it. Is that a beach? Cordy asked, pointing at the shore we could see far below. It's probably private, I said. In Minneapolis, the waterfront was all public land. This was one of the things I genuinely liked about the city. All the fancy lakefront houses faced a sidewalk, a road, a bike path, a park, and then the lake. In Massachusetts, huge sections of the oceanfront were owned by rich people, although most towns had carved out beaches for their residents. No, Cordy said. Gwen says that in Finstow, the town owns all the oceanfront. I wasn't sure I believed that, but I squinted down at the shore and I couldn't see any oceanfront cottages. I did see something else, though. Look, I said, seals. Seals in the wild? That's definitely not a zoo down there. We have to go see them. You'll have to promise not to accidentally fall in the water, I said. It's not warm enough to swim. I have not fallen into the water on purpose in years, Cordy muttered. Okay, I said. Let me see what the map says, if there's a path down from here or if we'll need to go back to the car. I was looking down at my phone, waiting for the map to load, when another woman came up, walking a tiny gray poodle. Are you Marissa's mom? Cordy said. I am. You must have known me by my dog. Cordy crouched down to pat the poodle, which was trying to jump up to lick her face and mostly failing because it was just too tiny. Marissa's phone lock screen is a picture of Urchin. Hi, I said. I'm Morgan, Cordelia's mom. I think we talked on the phone. I'm Rosemary, she said. Marissa mentioned you talked about our standing stone, so I thought maybe I'd come up and see if I ran into you. It's a nice day for a walk. Cordy looked up at her, her face open and cheerful. Rosemary looked us over with the same intense reserve I'd felt over the phone. She and Gwen's mom had both shown this open wariness of me as an outsider that seemed honestly a little over the top. I gave her my best bland smile. Is there a path down to the beach? Cordy asked her. There are seals down there. We'll stay 50 yards away, I added. I did research on pinnipeds for a while. I know not to disturb them. I can show you the way down, Rosemary said. We walked back down to the road, and then Rosemary took us to a much steeper path that led to a set of uneven stone stairs built into the hill. She picked up the tiny poodle and tucked him under one arm. Watch your step, she said. Pretty much every year the town meeting talks about whether to rebuild these, or at least add a handrail. The problem is they're quaint the way they are, and a lot of people prefer that to safe.
I love it. Thank you so much. So this piece is just jam-packed with themes dissecting ownership of women's bodies, of written word and ideas, of land. And then you also have this beautiful piece about Minneapolis, about a near future in which Minneapolis goes through a time of need, the year without sunshine, kind of looking at global climate crisis in the same way. And you incorporate a lot of themes there about ownership too. I guess, what is it about that sense of sharing / ownership that haunts you, and how do you incorporate that?
The land ownership in the Four Sisters is partly based on conversations with my husband comparing New England to Minnesota. Mm-hmm. And in particular, the area where he grew up in a suburb of Boston to Minneapolis. It's one of the fact that our lakes are public property, and that, that there's almost, with one narrow exception, the waterfront in Minneapolis is publicly owned. It's parkland, and the lakefront houses are not right on the water. They don't get a private beach. Mm-hmm. It's one of the things I really cherish about the Twin Cities. And it's something that Ed has commented on, how much he wishes Massachusetts had done something like this, because they could have. There was a point at which they could have said that the oceanfront land is reserved to the Commonwealth in perpetuity. And my sister lives in Kingsfield. They added quite a few years ago now. It feels recent because, but quite a few years ago now, they added a drainage pond near her house, which involved actually tearing down a bunch of houses, which is unfortunate. But it's they really needed the drainage pond. This is
Wetland management.
Yeah. They needed somewhere for the water to go, or all the area was having significant problems with flooding, with houses flooding. So they added I think actually 2 drainage ponds. And then, having put in a drainage pond, they added park benches, a little path that led all the way around. Having added it, they immediately made it an amenity, because it was it's little, but it's still a tiny little lake, and we treated it that way, Minneapolis treated it that way. And I really love that about the Twin Cities, the fact that the riverfront and not always the riverfront, but the lakefronts all, I really like that this is a decision that Minneapolis and St. Paul made.
Yeah. For those of you who have not read A Year Without Sunshine, that is not one we'll feature today, but that we will include in the show notes a link to a podcast in which it is read fully. It is a really beautiful illustration of the concept of sharing over hoarding, essentially, and how important sharing will become to us as a society. So how do you typically approach establishing this sense of place in your writing? Is your writing process the same whether the setting is real or imaginary, present or future?
It's similar. If it's a real place, I like to look at it on Google Maps and on Google Street View, and I look at pictures people have taken. Mm-hmm. If it's close by, I can go there, but if it's not, I rely heavily on Google Street View and photos. And if it's not a real place, I sometimes try to find something analogous that I can go look at. So Finstow, for example, isn't a real place, but I looked up a lot of the maps of the coastline in the area where it's described as existing, and tried to get a sense of how do the beaches work there? Are they is there cliff? Is there flat leading up to the beach? What varieties do they have in that particular, in the approximate spot where I was imagining this imaginary town goes? what would it look like? And I tried to look at existing photos of real places to get a sense so that I could describe it in a way that would fit and would work.
You said the town council chose the rickety over the safe, right? Is that the word?
Quaint.
Quaint.
It's quaint.
Quaint, sorry, over the
Yes.
safe. Where is that coming from? I just felt like that was so beautiful and so illustrative.
That's coming from a lot of time in New England. Also my husband, although he would totally want a safe staircase because, he he wants a handrail if he's going down a long flight of stairs. But he also would probably vote for the pretty quaint stairs. He wouldn't want to get rid of something. He doesn't like to get rid of anything that's pretty.
So, all right. So when you're giving readers sense of place, I just feel like there's this underlying sense of values. So maybe not valuing safety so much as the sharing of space, the commonwealth, the common areas. What other values do you bring to that establishment of setting?
When I'm developing a setting, I really want stuff to make a certain amount of sense and fit together. There's a book that I read years ago, Diana Wynne Jones' book, The Tough Guide to Fantasyland, is a satiric travel book for going to the generic fantasy setting. And she makes fun of like fantasy settings where there is stew that's just always the same and not described in any real way. And like there's trash piles that never rot and there's never any explanation for where anything comes from. And I work really hard to not write like that. Like if you're eating stew, I want it to be a specific stew. And if it's bean stew, somebody has to be growing the beans. And if it's mutton stew, somebody has to be shepherding the sheep. Like there's a whole infrastructure implied by everything you put into your story. And I try to like think about the ways in which that manifests. And I mean, I'm a writer. I'm not an expert on any of this. But I try to make it so that, if you're eating mutton in a fantasy story I've written, we may not actually ever see herds of sheep, but I want a sense that they're there. I want you to feel like if you started walking, you would eventually get to the herds of sheep, as opposed to you'll just fall off the edge of the map. Like that's what I want in my stories, is a sense that the rest of the world is there, even if you don't see it. One of my pet peeves are fantasy stories that have hot showers, because there's a whole lot of infrastructure. Like I understand, certainly if there's a way to do it, you're going to have hot showers, because hot showers are one of the greatest inventions of civilization. But also they require a civilization. They require an incredible level of infrastructure, and that infrastructure could be technological, it could be magical, or it could be human. And if you're getting your hot baths because humans carry buckets of water and heat them up and then carry them to where your bathtub is and fill it, I want those humans to be visible, and I want them to, like, they're people in the story.
It reminds me of the Curse of Chalion, the bathhouse, I want to say.
Yes. Yeah. And like in the Curse of Chalion, what you see of the bathhouse is that like there's big copper tubs and there's like wood kept burning under them to keep the water heated, so that like the water is hot. Like there's a little boy that is the bath boy who like rinses casserole with a bucket. And then this matters because this is a spoiler, but it happens very early in the book.
Yeah.
The boy sees casserole scars from being flogged and reaches an entirely incorrect conclusion about what he might have done to get those scars. And this sets a whole lot of things in motion. Lois's books, I love, her plots are always like just perfectly interlocking parts where like everything that happens matters and affects the ultimate outcome in really beautifully done ways. But that is a gun on the mantelpiece that comes back multiple times in multiple ways, and it is an amazing piece of the plot.
So it seems like you're saying like nothing is taken for granted. There's an ecosystem.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminds me of, it's kind of the opposite of the Disneyfication of things, right? Where everything just appears perfect. And you can see this in some of the more, those like 90s and aughts developments, right? That just look like set pieces from Blazing Saddles or something, right? Like
Yeah. I heard a line recently that I really liked, which is that if you can walk to get your coffee, but your barista has to live an hour away, you don't live in a walkable community, you live in a theme park. Yes. And like, I feel like a lot of people do live in theme parks. And I feel like, I don't ever want my world building to feel like a theme park. Even if I'm writing about something that's happening at a theme park, I want there to be an awareness of the backstage areas, because a theme park has a backstage area. I have a friend who worked at Disney World as a costumed character. At one point, she played a bunch of different characters. Her favorite was Donald, because he's allowed to be a jerk. And like, she can tell you things like how those costumes smell and the ways in which Disney manages its guests. So that they have a good experience, but also that the people working there don't get like accidentally knocked off their feet by like enthusiastic hugs and things like that. There's like this, Disney has this incredibly elaborate infrastructure dedicated to propping up the illusions that it presents. And like, if I am setting something at a theme park, I want my reader to be able to see the illusion and how the illusion is being made, because that's what makes it interesting.
And I'm relating it back to the very beginning of this interview. Think about how you as a teenager get a car, get a license.
Yeah.
And your whole worldview is shifted when you see what's underneath that.
Yes, very much. Yeah.
Speaking of worldviews, I would like to get into this next one, Liberty's Daughter. This one is a novel imagining a near future scenario in which libertarians found an archipelago of floating seasteads in the Pacific. The main character, Beck Garrison, is a teenage finder, one who sources items for trade, but unfortunately her work begins uncovering secrets the seastead's most powerful residents want to remain secret. The reading is from Beck's explanation of her home.
I live on Min, short for New Minerva, which is a seastead in the Pacific Ocean, 220 nautical miles west from Los Angeles, California. The seastead is basically a chain of man-made islands, anchored into place with some bonus retired cruise ships and ocean freighters chained up to the platforms. Min is only one part. There is also Lib, Rosa, Sal, Pete, and Amsterdam. And each one is its own country with its own set of rules, except for Lib, which doesn't have any rules at all. That's sort of the point. The seasteads were built by people who wanted more freedom and less government. A lot less government, in the case of Lib, than they thought they'd ever be able to get in any existing country. And since all the land that existed was already claimed by someone, they built their own. That was 49 years ago. My father and I came to live on Min when I was 4, after my mother died. I'm 16 now. I'd wanted to get a job, but it was hard to find one. Mostly, the people who were hiring wanted real grown-ups with PhDs. For the scut work, stuff like mopping floors and washing dishes, they wanted to hire guest workers, because they're cheap and reliable. Guest workers are non-citizens. To become a citizen, you have to buy a stake, and that's not cheap. Most of the people who come here without the cash to buy a stake don't have the money to get here, so they take out a bonded loan and then work to pay it off. I finally found a job at Miscellany, which is this general store run by a guy named Jamie. Jamie hired me to find stuff. Here's a weird thing about the seastead. People have a lot of money, stakeholders do anyway, guest workers not so much. But there's still a lot of stuff they can't just go buy easily. I mean, you can go to California to shop, but it's a long boat ride or an expensive flight. And entering the U.S. can be a huge hassle because they don't recognize seastead citizenship as a thing. You can order stuff, but shipping things to the seastead takes forever and costs a ton. But there are about 80,000 people who live on the seastead permanently, like me and my dad, and sometimes we need stuff. We get a lot of tourists, Amsterdam does anyway, and they bring stuff to sell or trade. But let's say you need something really specific, like a size 6 black bathing suit. There's only a few stores, and they might not have one in stock. But there's probably someone on the seastead who's got one, who will sell it for the right price or trade it for the right thing. And that was my job, finding that stuff and then getting the person who owned it what they wanted in exchange. I found the size 6 black bikini, and I found a case of white musk scented shampoo, and I found a particular brand of baby binky, not to mention a bottle of fancy single malt scotch. That was actually pretty easy. Tourists bring fancy booze because the guidebooks say it's easy to sell or trade here. And a pair of sapphire drop style earrings along with a nice presentation box for them.
Thank you. You had to have come up with a setting first for this one, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? Like, how did the setting help you shape the plot and characters?
My sister went to Harvey Mudd College in the late 1990s. And one of her classmates was a guy named Patry Friedman. Patry Friedman runs the Seasteading Institute. And I originally heard about this because my sister was like, hey, check this out. And I was like, wow, what a weird concept. And then I was like, I could write like, you know, the kind of stories that normally you have to set in space, and I wouldn't even have to figure out a way to get people to space. You could do this near future. That's so cool. And it fit an idea I'd had ages ago, earlier about a place where like, it was just like a little tiny seed of an idea that actually doesn't show up until very late in the book, about a place where like the elevators prioritize the executives. Like the elevators come to you faster based on your rank as communicated by your employee badge. And then I linked it to another idea I had, which involved investigating the disappearance of a person. And
yeah,
that is where that book came from.
How did this setting help you say what you wanted to say?
It's pretty great for showing the value of a functioning government.
Which I'm a little worried about. I think a lot of us are pretty worried about right now.
I mean, Beck, the main character, grew up in this intensely libertarian environment, and that's very much part of who she is. So I don't know what you call it when it's not exactly an unreliable narrator, but it's like a narrator who's definitely observing things correctly, but is interpreting them through a worldview that she's grown up with. So like, she's like, how do we solve these problems? And the answer for, most people would be, well, this is why you have a government, my dear. I really believe in the value of a functioning government. And I really believe in the value of, having effective regulation on things like water and on things like working conditions, emergency healthcare. I had a really good time writing about this world that is here and also doesn't have any of that stuff. Yeah, it's not something I really want to live through.
Yeah. We're going to get a second one?
I'm undecided. It's complicated by, we'll see. Maybe. Okay. I have ideas. I have ideas for other stuff that
because we could use an instruction book here.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, I mean
So I mean that kind of leads to my final big question is like, what would you share with aspiring writers, particularly speculative fiction writers, as we face so many social and climate challenges in this time and the way that we write our stories? What can lead us to maybe a better place or sound the warning alarms that need to be sounded?
So what I would say to aspiring writers is that your voice matters and your ideas matter and your stories matter. And you really have to believe in that. You really, in order to stick with it and keep writing. And it's really true. You're the only person who can tell your stories, and you're the only person who can speak in your voice. And voice is an incredibly important part of the stories that get told and the books that get written. And I mention this in part because it is something that there's a lot of things that ChatGPT cannot do, but one of them is very much speak in your voice. And there's value in both the warning story and in the story that shows people what they could build at the end of the tunnel. And you just have to figure out what you want to do. I mean, some people really want to scream the warning, And like, I have written more stuff that is about the story at the end of the tunnel, but I wouldn't tell anyone not to write a good warning story. Just, I worry, the line about how new from Meta, it's the Torment Nexus to them. I do feel like there's an awful lot of stories that were written as warnings that were not taken as such by some of the readers in some really weird ways. Like the people who watch Star Wars and really fetishize like the Empire and the aesthetic of the Empire. These are actually like, genocidal bad guys. They're not really supposed to be as appealing as people find them. I read an article that theorized that the author of The Hunger Games has been writing books, has been writing sequels that get just more and more intense about, she strips away all the stuff that people find cool each time, even more of it, because people read the books and they're like, that sounds so neat. And she's like, no, it's not neat. It's horrifying. You're supposed to be horrified. Here, I'll write you one with all the neat stuff taken away. Just horror, okay? Do you get it now? Are you horrified yet? My advice to writers is to tell the stories that call to you to tell them, and to tell the stories that are your stories that only you can tell, and to believe that they matter.
Thank you. So besides going to join Worldcon and maybe vote for your Hugo Award this year, where else can readers find you and support you?
You can find me at my website, which is at naomikritzer.com. And I'm going to have a book called Obstetrics coming out. It's Obstetrics with an X at the end, coming out next year. It'll be a novella coming out from Tor.com, and it'll be available as both a print book and an ebook. It's about an obstetrician who gets kidnapped by a cult.
Oof.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Naomi. What a pleasure it was to talk to you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for this episode of the Streets.mn podcast. The show is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Non-Derivative license, so feel free to republish the episode as long as you are not altering it and you are not profiting from it. The music in this episode is by Eric Brandt and the Urban Hillbilly Quartet. This episode was produced, edited, and transcribed by Sherry Johnson, and was engineered by me, Ian R. Buck. We're always looking to feature new voices on the Streets.mn podcast, so if you have ideas for future episodes, drop us a line at podcast@streets.mn. Streets.mn is a community blog and podcast and relies on contributions from audience members like you. If you can make a one-time or recurring donation, you can find more information about doing so at streets.mn/donate. Find other listeners and discuss this episode on your favorite social media platform using the hashtag StreetsMNPodcast. Until next time, take care.